Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for letting us share our thoughts with you. In Airbus, we believe that we can enhance the flight safety if we encourage our pilots to fly manually the aircraft during line operations and on a regular basis during routine flights. When you look at these two pilots, what do you think in terms of their manual flying skills? Do you think they were skilled in manually flying the aircraft? I'm very sure that they were highly skilled, simply because they did it every single day. Because if you practice something every single day, you naturally become very skilled over time. It's just like going to the gym. If you go to the gym for one day for 9 hours, this will not get you into shape. But if you work every single day, and if it's only for 20 minutes, this will get you into shape. It is the consistency that matters. Why do I tell you this? Over the recent decades, automated systems were introduced into the cockpit in order to reduce the pilot workload and mitigate potential threats and errors. In fact, evidences are strong that automation does have a positive effect when it comes to safety. But what we missed somehow while introducing the automation into the cockpit was to make sure that pilots maintain a sufficient routine in manually flying the aircraft. Today, pilots experience a lack of opportunities to manually fly the aircraft during line operation, leading to a lack of confidence and trust in their own manual flying skills. In the end, it makes them dependent on the automation system. Naturally, some questions come to our mind. Do we really still need pilots who are skilled in manually flying the aircraft? Is the competence of flight path management manual really still required with all the technology available today? Isn't it better to demand the highest level of automation at all times? To answer these questions, let's start by having a look at some examples from the normal operation. I will show you a video of a circling approach in Paro Airport, runway 33 in Bhutan. The circling approach is the only instrument approach available for this runway. The MDA for an Airbus 320 is at 10,600 feet, almost 3,300 above the runway, and will be reached shortly prior to PR 710, indicated by the blue arrow on the map. According to SOPs, the autopilot must be disengaged at this point at the latest. So the video will start at PR 712 at the bottom right of the chart. We know Paro Airport is a very special and difficult airport, and certainly worth being categorized as Category C, requiring a specific training. However, it's only one of many airports all around the world where the pilots have to demonstrate their manual flying skills to safely complete the flight. By the way, were you aware of the fact that to make full use of the certified crosswind envelope, you have to turn off the autopilot? So in strong wind conditions, close to the maximum crosswind component, the approach and landing can only be completed with the pilots manually flying the aircraft. Anyone knows it requires very good skills. This graph shows you the top 5 causes for worldwide accident from 1999 to 2018, so basically 20 years. Starting from left to right with the biggest one, runway excursions, followed by system component failures, loss of control in flight, abnormal runway contact, and control flight into terrain. The interesting message here is that the lack of manual flying skills is a main contributing factor for 3 out of the top 5 accident causes. In line with the previous slide, recent studies from IATA, International Air Transport Association, which include 339 fatal and non-fatal accidents from January 2013 to December 2017, shows that in every third accident, a lack of manual flying skills was the main contributing factor. Let's now have a look at the cockpit design process. When we design an Airbus cockpit, we build the cockpit around the human, around the pilot. So we ask ourselves, what do the pilot needs? Bearing this in mind, we follow 10 specific design rules, of which I will give you 3 relevant extracts. The rule number 1, the pilot must be ultimately responsible for the safety of the flight. Rule number 2, the pilot must be able to exercise the full authority. Rule number 6 states that the automation systems are only an additional feature which the pilot can choose to use or not. These rules have been in effect since the early days of Airbus and are still valid today. Last but not least, aircraft certification. During the aircraft certification, the risk of different failures is assessed. The potential outcomes of some certain failures conditions, which are being examined during aircraft certification, would not be acceptable in terms of safety if we assume that the pilot is doing nothing. In order to improve the outcome of some failure condition to an acceptable level, aircraft certification expects the pilot to take appropriate actions. Let me give you an example. Here you can see an example of a wrong autopilot guidance, although we have a correct landing system deviation indication during a precision approach. You will realize that the autopilot wants to fly to the right, although the aircraft should turn to left to stay on the localizer. I think we all agree that this aircraft behavior will not be acceptable without an action from the pilot flying. Only the assumption that the pilot monitors the raw data information, detects the wrong flight guidance and takes over manually will change the outcome from unacceptable to acceptable. Of course, this requires an appropriate performance in flight path management through manual control by the pilot flying. What does it mean? In other words, if we accept pilots not being competent in flight path management manual control, we would accept the aircraft, we would operate the aircraft out of the certification requirements. So yes, we believe that a pilot skilled in manual flight is essential to ensure a safe flight. However, evidence shows us we are not in the shape we would like to be. So we need to practice more regularly to get back into shape. We believe we need to give our pilots more opportunities to fly manually during line operations so they can actually stay in shape and they can actually stay skilled. The conditions and procedures for manual flying should be clearly explained to the pilot by an operator policy written in the operator's manual. This policy should give the rationale why practicing manual flying during line operation on a regular basis is essential. In other words, the policy should encourage the pilot to regularly reduce the level of automation and, of course, when the situation permits. The policy should furthermore frame the general condition in which the pilot may choose to disconnect the automation system. This condition might differ from airline to airline, depending, for example, on general pilot experience or the route network. So each airline should assess its own constraints and based on this, develop its own framework. Of course, one size doesn't fit all. However, As only the flight crew can assess the context of the day, we believe in the end it must be up to the flight crew to decide whether or not it is appropriate to reduce the level of automation. The policy should require the pilot to perform a risk assessment based on threats identified during the flight, like the fatigue, the workload, traffic, aircraft status, weather, and so on. To do so, the pilot must be properly trained to know how to perform a risk assessment based on the threat and error management principles, so the pilot can effectively assess if it is appropriate to reduce the level of automation depending on the context. We also encourage you to allow the flight crew to completely switch off the automation system during visual segments or visual approach if the flight crew perceives the appropriate context, and particularly the workload in this case. Flying without the autopilot, auto thrust, and flight guidance can reinforce the understanding of the pitch and thrust setting and the energy management. Logically, we don't believe in any restrictive policies, like a maximum use of automation at all times, or like a reduction of the level of automation. For example, autopilot off doesn't mean strictly auto thrust off at the same time. It depends on the situation. We also don't believe in implementing a minimum frequency of manual flight. For example, mandatory number of manually flown approach per month, because this might influence the decision-making of the crew in selecting the level of automation away from the safety. Training of manual flight in the simulator is a prerequisite for manually flying the aircraft during line operations, but it's not a substitute. All flight crew members must be properly trained and assessed in flight path management manual during initial and recurrent training. Flight crews should frequently practice flying the aircraft in the simulator during all the training scenarios throughout the whole flight envelope. To conclude, we believe in encouraging pilots to regularly fly the aircraft manually during line operations, framed by a clear operator policy, respecting your individual constraints and needs as an airline. The final decision whether to reduce the level of automation or not must remain within the flight crew. The flight crew should make this decision based on the threats and error management principle. Ladies and gentlemen, it is of paramount importance to give pilots opportunities to regularly fly the aircraft manually during line operations. By regularly flying the aircraft manually, pilots should regain confidence and trust in their own manual flying skills. That will make them less dependent on the automation system, and in the end, more resilient to be able to manage any unforeseen situation in which they might require their manual flying skills.